who's in charge? Who's in charge of this country at the moment? Because next week we've got what's going to be some really, really horrific rail strikes up and down the whole country, bringing the country to a complete standstill. This week we've just had a foreign judge in a foreign court determine how our domestic government can rule our domestic migration policy.
Extraordinary.
And I think it was last week we had the mob down in Peckham deciding who could or could not be deported as a foreign criminal, as opposed to the police. So I want to know, who's in charge of this country at the moment? It's clearly not the government.
Yeah, that you and I were discussing off air. That was a massive wake-up call to all of us, I think, on Thursday night, when after pretty much a week of legal wrangling, extremely expensive legal wrangling in our courts, during which 3 separate judges decided on 3 separate occasions that flight to Rwanda was legal and could take off, and the migrants would be at no risk when they got there. After all that, a quick phone call to a taxi rank judge in Strasbourg, who was no doubt in a pub or something, and he just said, oh, yeah, no, that can't happen. So what that means is, I mean, never mind just about the migrant situation, it means that any policy this government has can be challenged in Strasbourg, and Strasbourg has authority over us. And I don't give a damn whether that's the EU or the European Court of Human Rights. Why is Europe still bossing Britain around?
Look, the simple answer is that they shouldn't be, and it's a massive wake-up call, I think, for tens of millions of proud, patriotic British citizens that a European court is still in charge here. And so, in a sense, sometimes you need that wake-up call. It's a bit like a sort of a slap round the face. What's going on here? And I think the reality is that in order to complete Brexit, to complete the great opportunity of Brexit, we've got to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, which means that we're no longer subject to these rulings. Because, look, we invented human rights. I mean, when you actually look at it, way back to Magna Carta in the 13th century, for heaven's sake, we don't need any lessons on human rights from anybody. And so, sure, we can replace most of the provisions of the European Convention on Human Rights in our own British Bill of Rights. And, of course, we want to set a great example. But we also want, crucially, to be in charge, to be in charge of our own destiny.
And let's get this straight. A lot of people saying to me, particularly on Twitter, where all these Remainer fanatics are having great fun saying that anyone who says you don't understand the European Court of Human Rights is different to the EU. So what? I don't care. I thought
the whole point, Kevin, was it was the principle of taking back control, taking back control from the European Union. And I think millions will now say we need to take back control from the European Court on Human Rights.
And the other aspect of this is this, Richard. People say, oh, well, don't you care about human rights? Human rights are important. You don't have to be in a club to worry about human rights, to care about human rights. We don't need to be in the European Court of Convention on Human Rights for us to be a caring nation that cares about human rights. We could pass our own bill. We don't have to be in the ECHR.
So there's a fascinating piece in today's Daily Mail on page 13 about actually how some of the illegal migrants who've tried to leave North Africa to go into the EU, how they've been essentially picked up, taken back to Africa, and they are being actually kept in really, really horrific conditions, according to this article, described in the Mail as an EU's hellhole. So I do think it's a bit hypocritical and a bit rich for anybody in and around the EU or the European Court of Human Rights to say, actually, we're not looking after migrants. You see the conditions that the migrants would be taken to in Rwanda. And frankly, I think it reinforces the quality conditions. The United Nations themselves complimented Rwanda for how well they were looking after and integrating 130,000 refugees, how well they were organising education of the children of refugees. Rwanda's built over 20,000 classroom spaces for refugees. And I actually read the Amnesty International report at the end of last year about a whole range of countries. And on Rwanda, Amnesty International had no complaints whatsoever about their treatment of refugees and migrants. They had more complaints about how Spain was treating them.
Yes, now the government, if you like, has already wasted £500,000 on that chartered Boeing 767 that never took off 2 nights ago. And they say they intend fully now to get the next flight rolling. You know, they got plans for the next flight, are steaming ahead. Well, we do one of two things here, don't we? We go through exactly the same process, which will happen. We'll be challenged in the British courts. It'll go to Strasbourg, to the European Court of Human Rights, and the European Court of Human Rights will say no again. So at that point, if we are to move forward with this, surely we have to say to the European Court of Human Rights, thanks very much, but we're ignoring you.
It requires real leadership, and actually, legally, we can do that. Because, as I understand, and I'm not a lawyer, but as I understand, their rulings can be treated as advisory. And many other countries do actually say, thanks for the advice, but we're going to carry on and do our own things. We adopt a very sort of gold-plated, typical civil servant attitude, saying that's the ruling, we've got to adopt it. So we could adopt that approach, but it requires real leadership, real courage from this government, and I'm pretty sceptical. But here's my prediction. I don't think a single illegal migrant who has come across the channel will go to Rwanda whilst we're still a member of the ECHR.